All right, let's go. The coffee on the table in front of you is from this morning, and it's been cold for 2 hours, and you haven't touched it because the man across from you is waiting for an answer you are not sure you are allowed to give. This is not a story about men in prison. The men being in prison is the setup. You are the story. The year is 1991. The Colombo family, one of New York's original 5 families, the organization that grew out of the Prophesy Borgata, the crew that ran South Brooklyn like a zip code has a heartbeat, is in the middle of a civil war. Half the men are under indictment. Half the men who aren't under indictment are shooting at the other half. And the women, the wives, the sisters, the mothers, the daughters, are holding the actual structure together with the particular competence of people who were never supposed to be acknowledged. This is your life inside that. 10 entries, 10 moments, 10 times you were in a room where the official record said you weren't there. 10, the phone call that wasn't supposed to be yours to make. The room you just walked into. It is a Tuesday afternoon in January 1992, and you are standing in the kitchen of a row house on East 13th Street in Brooklyn, and the phone is ringing, and the person who is supposed to answer it is not here. He hasn't been here in 11 days because 11 days ago a federal judge in the Eastern District of New York signed a piece of paper that put him in a holding facility in Lower Manhattan, while his lawyers prepare for a trial that his lawyers privately believe will result in a sentence measured not in months but in decades. The phone rings a second time. You know who it is. You know what they want. You also know that you are not supposed to be the one who answers. That was not the arrangement. But the arrangement assumed the men would be available, and the men are not available, and the phone is on its fourth ring. You pick it up. What you noticed. The voice on the other end is a man named Rosario, and he runs a numbers operation out of a social club on Avenue U, and what he needs is simple. He needs to know whether a payment that was supposed to be made on Friday is still expected, because the man who was supposed to collect it has not appeared, and the man who was supposed to explain the man's absence has also not appeared, and Rosario has been holding an envelope for 4 days that is thick enough that he has been keeping it in his freezer behind a package of Italian sausages, because he does not know where else to put it. You know the answer to Rosario's question. You know the answer because you have been keeping the ledger since September, not because anyone asked you to, but because if you did not keep the ledger, there would be no ledger. You tell Rosario that the payment is still expected. You tell him a name, not your name, a name, and you tell him that person will be in contact. Then you hang up and you write down the time of the call, the name of the caller, the amount referenced, and the name you gave him, in a notebook with a floral cover that is sitting on the counter next to the coffee maker. The notebook has been filling up since October. Nobody told you to start it. Nobody told you to stop. What got out and what didn't. The FBI surveillance log for that address during that period contains references to phone traffic, but no transcripts of the specific call, because the wiretap authorization that covered the premises had been filed under the name of the male occupant, and the male occupant was no longer in residence. And when the Bureau's legal team reviewed the coverage scope, they determined that the authorization did not clearly extend to a secondary occupant conducting business in the male occupant's absence. The surveillance report for that month noted, in a paragraph near the end that was not included in the summary submitted to the case agent, that an unidentified female voice had been observed handling what appeared to be administrative communications. The word observed is doing significant work in that sentence, because what the agent writing the report meant was, we heard her. What the report did not say was what she said. How it was closed. The matter of administrative continuity within the Colombo family during the period of the 1991-1993 leadership vacuum was addressed, in the Bureau's subsequent case filings, through language characterizing the organization as having experienced operational disruption consistent with prosecution pressure. The women of the household were classified, across most of the relevant case documents as non-participants. This classification was applied consistently. Several subsequent indictments, returned over the following 4 years, relied on evidence gathered during this period. None of the indictments named a woman as a subject of the administrative continuity matter, the thing that doesn't close. And yet the notebook existed. This is not speculation. It was recovered during a search of the premises in 1994, cataloged as evidence, and retained in the case file where it remained for 3 years before a paralegal reviewing materials for a civil proceeding noted that the entries in it corresponded, with high precision, to transaction records that the prosecution had previously been unable to source. The notebook was 11 months of operational memory. The handwriting was never formally attributed. The gap between what the official record says about who ran the administrative functions of the Colombo family during those 11 months and what the notebook suggests is approximately 62 pages wide. 9. What you did with your face in court. The room you just walked into. It is the spring of 1992, and you are sitting in the third row of a federal courtroom in Brooklyn, and the room smells like floor wax and recycled air, and the fluorescent lights buzz at a frequency you can feel in your back teeth. And the man at the defense table, the man you have been married to for 19 years, the man whose name is on the lease and the car registration and the phone bill but who has not lived in a way that resembled normal in approximately 4 years, is listening to a prosecutor describe his role in a racketeering enterprise that operated across 4 boroughs and generated, according to the indictment, revenue that required a second bag to carry out of the room. You are looking at him. He is not looking at you. This is the arrangement. You are not here to communicate. You are here to be seen. What you noticed. The jury is 12 people, and you have been studying them the way you study a room you're about to spend a long time in. There is a woman in seat 4, second row of the jury box, who is approximately your age, and every time the prosecutor raises his voice, her jaw tightens slightly on the left side. There is a man in seat 9 who looks at the defense table the way people look at an intersection where they saw an accident once, not with hostility, but with the specific wariness of someone who knows what can happen in a place that looks ordinary. The defense attorney, a man named Jerry who bills at a rate that required the sale of a property in Staten Island, has advised you on nothing. He has not spoken to you directly about the case because you are not his client, and what you know is not something he wants formalized. What you have been sorting into categories since October. What can be said in court? What can be said outside court? What can only be said in the kitchen with the television turned up, and what cannot be said at all? You sit in the third row with your hands folded and your face arranged into an expression that a reporter from the Post, covering the trial, will later describe as composed. The word she wanted but did not use was controlled. What got out and what didn't. The trial generated significant press coverage, most of which focused on the defendant and the charges. The Post ran a photograph of the defendant being escorted into the courthouse on the second day of testimony. The caption named the defendant. The woman in the photograph standing 4 feet behind him, holding a coat, was not named. The Daily News ran a sidebar about the wives of Colombo defendants, describing them collectively as loyal and tight-lipped, which were 2 accurate words that together managed to say almost nothing. The FBI case file on the trial includes a section on family communications during the proceedings. The section is largely redacted. The unredacted portions describe logistics. The redacted portions, based on the lengths and positions of the black bars, appear to describe something more specific. How it was closed. The defendant was convicted on 7 of 11 counts and sentenced to a term that his attorney appealed twice. The conviction was affirmed. The sentence was later modified in a manner that the court's order described as consistent with sentencing guidelines revisions applicable to the relevant statute. The modification was filed on a Friday afternoon in August, which is when courts file things they are not eager to discuss. The modification reduced the effective sentence by a period that the defendant's attorney described, in a brief press statement, as meaningful. The thing that doesn't close. But the question of what the woman in the third row knew, and when she knew it, and what she did with it during the 18 months between the beginning of the trial and the date the modification was filed, that question is not in any court document. The woman in the third row sat through 44 days of proceedings. She was present for every session except two, both of which occurred on days when, according to records that would surface 3 years later in an unrelated matter, she was in a different borough conducting a meeting that the official record does not describe as a meeting. 8. The visit you made, that wasn't a visit. The room you just walked into. It is a Sunday in March 1992, and you are sitting in a visiting room at the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn, and there are 11 other women in the room doing the same thing you are doing, which is sitting across a table from a man in a facility uniform and speaking in a way that is careful without appearing careful. The guards do not search your memory. They search your bag. They find nothing in your bag because nothing in your bag is the point. You have been coming here every Sunday for 6 weeks, and the information you bring in and carry out is not written on paper, and it is not hidden in a food item, and it is not communicated in code. It is in your head. You are the message. What you noticed. The man across from you, Carmine Persico's organization, the family's imprisoned boss, has a way of making himself understood through intermediaries. And the man across from you is one of 2 intermediaries whose name you actually know, places both hands flat on the table when he has finished speaking. This is the signal that the communication is complete and that you should not ask follow-up questions. You have learned to treat these visits the way you treat a deposition. Say the minimum, record the maximum, exit clean. The room is fluorescent lit and linoleum floored, and it smells like institutional soap and the specific anxiety of people who know they are being watched. There are cameras in the upper corners of the room. You have been told by the man across from you that the audio quality of those cameras is, in his word, inconsistent. You have decided to treat that information as neither reliable nor irrelevant. Across the table, the man's right thumb traces a small circle on the surface, once, twice, and then his hands go flat and the visit is over. What got out and what didn't? The Bureau of Prisons logs visiting records for all MDC facilities. The logs for this period document your visits by name and date. They record the duration and the identity of the visited party. They do not record, because they have no mechanism to record, the content of what was said. The FBI later reviewed the visiting logs in connection with a separate investigation and noted the regularity of your appearances. A notation in the file characterizes your visits as consistent with spousal contact. This characterization is technically accurate. An agent who reviewed the file 2 years later, in connection with a different proceeding, wrote a one-line addendum that the file's supervisor subsequently marked as speculative and not incorporated into the official summary. The one-line addendum said, "Frequency and pattern inconsistent with social contact only." How it was closed. The visiting records were subpoenaed as part of a grand jury investigation in 1994. You were called to testify. You appeared. You were represented by counsel. You answered questions. The questions asked about specific visits. You confirmed the dates and affirmed the social nature of the contacts. You were not asked about content. Your attorney had prepared you for 11 questions. The prosecutor asked 9 of them. The 2 unasked questions were, your attorney told you afterward, the 2 he could not figure out how to phrase in a way that didn't invite a Fifth Amendment invocation that would have ended the session. You did not volunteer information. You were thanked for your cooperation and released. The thing that doesn't close. And yet the Colombo family's internal communications did not stop during the period of the senior leadership's incarceration. Subsequent RICO prosecutions, built on evidence gathered between 1991 and 1994, described a chain of command that remained functional throughout the war period, passing decisions about the conflict with the Orna faction downward and outward in ways that the indictments attributed entirely to the male participants in the chain. The visiting logs covering that period list 18 names of regular female visitors across the family's incarcerated membership. 18 women, visiting a combined total of more than 200 times over 30 months. The official record describes what the men did during those 30 months in considerable detail. It is quieter about who carried the words between them. Before we go any further, if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Not because of what just happened, because of what's coming. The closer we get to number 1, the less this feels like history. Hit subscribe. Keep the door open. 7. The meeting that happened in a diner. The room you just walked into. It is a Wednesday morning in November 1991, 6 weeks into the shooting war between the Persico faction and the Orna faction, and you are in a booth at a diner on Flatbush Avenue, and the eggs in front of you are untouched, and the woman across from you is the wife of a man who is aligned with the other side. This is not a chance encounter. You called her. She showed up. The diner is neutral ground by convention rather than agreement. Nobody declared it neutral, but nobody has ever conducted business here in a way that would compromise it. And that unspoken rule is one of approximately 40 unspoken rules that structure the world you are moving through. The woman across from you is named Rosalie, and she is 44 years old, and her husband has been on the run for 3 weeks, and her expression is the expression of someone who has stopped sleeping in the way that people stop sleeping when they are waiting for a specific phone call. What you noticed. What you have come here to do is not negotiate. You have not been authorized to negotiate. What you have come here to do is establish that communication between the two sides of this war does not have to stop entirely, simply because the men on both sides are either imprisoned, dead, or hiding in houses in Long Island that they cannot leave during daylight hours. You have brought nothing to the table except your presence and the message you are carrying in your head. Rosalie has brought the same. She wraps both hands around her coffee cup, and she looks at you, and she says 3 sentences. The first sentence establishes that her side is aware of a meeting that occurred on a specific date. The second sentence establishes that her side's interpretation of that meeting was not what your side intended. The third sentence is a question, phrased as a statement, that asks whether there is a version of the next 3 months that does not end the way the last 3 months ended, which is to say, with men in body bags and men in courtrooms and the whole structure bleeding out onto the sidewalk. You don't answer immediately. You pick up your coffee. You take a sip. The eggs between you go cold. What got out and what didn't? The Colombo War, as it became known, generated extensive law enforcement documentation, journalistic coverage, and subsequent prosecutorial attention. The FBI's account of the war focuses almost entirely on the male combatants, who ordered the shootings, who carried them out, who financed the weapons, who provided the safe houses. The role of intermediary communication between the factions, the back-channel conversations that occasionally slowed the killing, and the back-channel breakdowns that occasionally restarted it, is described in bureau documents primarily as the work of male associates operating at reduced visibility. The diner on Flatbush does not appear in any FBI file by name or address. The meeting between you and Rosalie does not appear anywhere in the official record of the war. What the official record says happened on that Wednesday morning in November 1991 is nothing significant. How it was closed. The Colombo War officially concluded, in the sense that federal prosecution addressed it. Through a series of RICO indictments returned between 1993 and 1995 that named more than 60 defendants across both factions. The indictments described the war's origins, its casualties, its command structure on both sides, and its eventual suppression through prosecution pressure. The indictments named no women as defendants in connection with the conflict itself. The prosecutorial narrative of how the war was conducted, sustained, and eventually wound down does not include a chapter about the negotiations that happened in booths, in kitchens, in the aisles of grocery stores, between women who were not authorized to negotiate but who understood that the alternative to unauthorized negotiation was an authorized body count. The thing that doesn't close. But the war produced approximately 12 dead and wounded across 18 months of active shooting. The rate of killing slowed in the winter of 1991 and 1992, then accelerated again in the spring. It slowed again in the fall of 1992 and did not fully accelerate again. The Bureau's internal analysis of the conflict's tempo attributed the slowdowns to prosecution pressure, leadership disruption, and tactical exhaustion. These were real factors. They were not the only factors. The diner on Flatbush Avenue is still there. The booth in the back, the one near the emergency exit, seats 4. You and Rosalie sat across from each other in it at least 3 more times after that first Wednesday morning, and what you said in that booth is not in any file anywhere. And the question of how much it cost the men in the family that nobody wrote it down is a question that nobody in the official record has thought to ask. 6. What loyalty looked like from the inside. The room you just walked into. It is a Sunday dinner in October 1989, 2 years before any of this, and the table is loud and full and nobody is arrested yet, and you are in the kitchen, and the kitchen is where the actual information moves. You have been part of this family, not the family of birth, the other family, for 12 years, and you have learned that the dining room is where men say what they want other men to hear, and the kitchen is where women say what is actually true. The woman standing next to you at the counter cutting bread has been in this organization longer than you have. She is 61 years old. Her name is Connie. Her son is a captain. Her husband died in 1977 in a manner that the family described as a heart attack and that she has never once in 12 years contradicted publicly. She hands you the bread knife. She says, without looking up, "You learn the whole thing or you learn nothing. There is no useful middle." What you noticed. The dinner is for 22 people, and the conversation in the dining room is animated and specific: sports, money, a construction contract in Staten Island, the particular irritation of a code enforcement officer on a specific block in Bensonhurst who has been making himself expensive. You move in and out of the dining room with food and come back to the kitchen each time with a layer of information that you add to the layer from the trip before. This is not eavesdropping. This is how the job works. By the end of the dinner, you know the following. A payment is 2 weeks late, and the lateness is deliberate. A man named Sal has said something to someone else that is being assessed for whether it was disloyal or merely stupid. And a conversation happened in a car 3 days ago that involved an amount of money that required a second bag that has not been accounted for. None of this was said to you directly. None of this required you to ask a question. Connie refills the bread basket and says, without looking up from the counter, "You're getting faster." What got out and what didn't. The sociology of organized crime families has been studied extensively by academics, journalists, and law enforcement analysts. The scholarship describes a strict gender division. Men conduct business, women maintain households. Women are protected from operational knowledge both for their safety and for the operational security of the organization. This description appears in FBI training materials, academic criminology texts, and journalistic accounts produced by reporters who spoke to male sources. The scholarship is not wrong exactly. It describes the formal structure accurately. What it describes less accurately is the informal structure, which is the structure that actually moves information. The kitchen table, the phone call at 11 at night, the message carried in a handbag from one address to another by a woman whose name appears in no organizational chart, because no organizational chart has ever captured what she actually does. How it was closed. The question of women's roles within organized crime families has been addressed, in the legal record, primarily through spousal privilege litigation, and through the testimony of cooperating witnesses. most of whom were male and most of whom described women as peripheral to operations. Courts have repeatedly treated this characterization as legally sufficient. Several scholars have published work arguing that the characterization is analytically incomplete. Their work has been cited in a small number of subsequent court proceedings. In those proceedings, it did not materially alter how the courts treated female witnesses or defendants. The thing that doesn't close. But Connie has been cutting bread in that kitchen since 1971. Her husband died. Her son became a captain. The family had a war. Men went to prison. The family kept functioning. Connie is still there. The bread still gets cut. The information still moves. The span of years across which the informal structure of the Colombo family has continued to function, absorbing arrests and convictions and wars and defections, is approximately 50. The formal structure has collapsed and reconstituted itself 4 times in that span. The informal structure has not collapsed once. The official record explains the formal structure in extensive detail. It is much quieter about what the women in the kitchen have been doing for half a century, and what it would have cost the organization if they had stopped. You've been inside this long enough to know that the next threshold isn't just a number. The closer you get to number 1, the more this stops being someone else's story. 5. The morning you moved money. The room you just walked into. It is a Thursday morning in February 1992, and you are sitting in the passenger seat of a Buick LeSabre on the BQE, and the traffic is stopped, and the bag on the floor between your feet contains enough that the man who counted it needed a second bag, and he gave you the one bag, and the second bag went somewhere else, and you don't know where, and you have decided that not knowing is a form of protection. The man driving is not talking. This is by design. You agreed before you left that you would not discuss the contents of the bag in the car, and you will not discuss where the bag is going. And if you are stopped, the bag is not yours. You don't know what's in it. You were given a ride. You've known the driver for years. His name is Vin, short for Vincent. You have rehearsed this the way you rehearse lines, until it sounds like memory rather than preparation. What you noticed. The traffic brakes at the Prospect Expressway merge and Vin accelerates, and for the first time in 20 minutes you can see forward past the car in front of you to the open lane. There is a state trooper idling on the right shoulder approximately a quarter mile ahead. You see him before Vin does, and you do not say anything, and you do not move, because moving is the tell. You keep your eyes on the road ahead. Vin sees the trooper and his right hand moves to the bottom of the steering wheel and stays there. This is what Vin does when he is being careful. The trooper does not move. You pass him at 60 miles an hour with the bag between your feet and your hands in your lap, and when you have gone far enough that the trooper is no longer visible in the side mirror, you exhale, and you do not look down at the bag, and you do not say anything to Vin, and Vin says nothing to you. The radio is on. A commercial for a mattress store plays. You watch the signs for the exits. What got out and what didn't. Federal prosecutors in subsequent RICO proceedings documented the movement of criminal proceeds through the Colombo family's network using records from bank accounts, currency transaction reports, and testimony from cooperating witnesses. The prosecution's narrative of money movement focused on the formal mechanisms, the accounts, the businesses used as fronts, the wire transfers, the cash deposits that were structured to fall below reporting thresholds. The prosecution's narrative did not focus extensively on the physical movement of currency. Because the physical movement of currency is difficult to document, and because the people who physically moved currency were, with a few notable exceptions, not the people the prosecution was building cases against. The bag between your feet does not appear in any federal document. The Thursday in February does not appear in any federal document. What the federal documents say about the movement of money on that day is nothing. How it was closed. The money laundering aspects of the Colombo RICO prosecutions were resolved through convictions of several senior male figures who were identified as the architects of the financial infrastructure. Asset forfeiture proceedings recovered a portion of the documented proceeds. The forfeiture amounts were described in press releases as significant. The press releases did not describe, because the forfeiture proceedings had no mechanism to describe, the portion of the proceeds that moved in bags on Thursdays in February, carried by women who were not on any organizational chart, through traffic on the BQE, to addresses that do not appear in any file. The thing that doesn't close. But you know the address. You know it because you went there and you handed the bag to a man who opened the door and took it without speaking and closed the door. And you went back to the Buick and Vin drove you home. And nobody said anything else about it. And 3 weeks later you did it again. The number of times you made that drive over the following 14 months is a number you know, and the federal government does not. The distance from your kitchen on East 13th Street to the address where you delivered the bags is 4.7 miles. 4.7 miles, driven in a Buick LeSabre on Thursday mornings, carrying the financial continuity of an organization that the official record describes as having been disrupted by prosecution pressure. The disruption was real. The continuity was also real. Both things were true at the same time, and only one of them made it into the indictments. 4. The question you were asked that you couldn't answer either way. The room you just walked into. It is a Tuesday evening in August 1992, and you are standing in the hallway of a house in Diker Heights, and the man who owns the house is standing between you and the door, and he is asking you a question. The question is about a name. He wants to know if the name he has been given, a name connected to the Orna faction, a name connected to a shooting that happened in June that put one of the Persico faction soldiers in a hospital in Coney Island for 3 weeks, is a name that you can confirm. He is not asking because he wants information. He is asking because he wants to know if you are a source he can rely on, or whether you have been carrying water for both sides in a way that, if confirmed, would create a problem that the word problem does not adequately describe. You understand all of this. The understanding is immediate and physical. It lives in your sternum and your hands. The man is not threatening you. He is asking a question. The question has 2 wrong answers. What you noticed. The man's name is Dominic, and he has been with the Persico faction since the beginning of the war, and he is standing in his own hallway in a white undershirt with his arms crossed and his weight on his back foot, and he is looking at you the way a man looks at something he is trying to decide about. His wife is in the kitchen. You can hear the television. You can hear one of the children, a boy, maybe 8, asking about something, and the wife's voice answering in a tone that means not now. Dominic's hands are not moving. A man whose hands are not moving is a man who has finished deciding what he is going to do and is waiting for external information to confirm or contradict the decision. You have approximately 30 seconds before the stillness means something different from what it currently means. You do not know the name. This is the truth. You do not know if not knowing the name is, in this hallway at this moment, a sufficient answer. The boy in the kitchen asks his question again. The wife's voice rises slightly. What got out and what didn't? The FBI's surveillance of Diker Heights addresses during the summer of 1992 documented vehicle traffic, known associates, and telephone communications. The house does not appear in the surveillance log for that Tuesday evening, either because the surveillance was not active at that location on that date or because the log is not complete. The conversation in the hallway was not recorded. Dominic appears in subsequent federal case documents as an unindicted co-conspirator in a matter related to the war. His name is mentioned 14 times across 3 separate indictments. The reasons for his non-indictment are not specified in the public record. You are not mentioned in any federal document related to the Diker Heights address. How it was closed. You gave Dominic an answer. The answer you gave was the answer you could give: specific, bounded, accurate, and it was not the answer he wanted because the answer he wanted would have required you to know something you did not know. You said what you knew. You said the boundary of what you knew. You said it without apology and without expansion. Dominic looked at you for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the doorway. That was the resolution. There was no official account of it. No file was created. The hallway in Diker Heights on a Tuesday evening in August 1992 does not exist in the record of the Colombo War. It exists in you. The thing that doesn't close. And yet you have thought about that hallway on many subsequent occasions, because the question Dominic asked you was not the only question of that type you were asked during those 14 months, and the answers you gave bounded, accurate, careful, determined on several occasions. What happened to someone whose name you had or had not confirmed? You did not pull a trigger. You did not order anything. You answered questions in hallways and at kitchen tables and across diner booths, and the answers you gave were pieces of information that moved through a structure that used information to do things to people. The gap between that and operational involvement is a gap that the law has defined carefully and that you have thought about with equal care. The definition is clear. The clarity is cold comfort in a hallway in Diker Heights with a man's hand still at his sides, and a child's voice carrying from the kitchen and 30 seconds before the stillness changes its meaning. 3. The night someone didn't come home. The room you just walked into. It is 11:15 at night on a Saturday in September 1992, and you are awake, and the phone has not rung, and the phone not ringing is the problem. You have been sitting at the kitchen table for 2 hours and 40 minutes. The coffee you made at 9 is cold. The television in the other room is on, because silence in this house at this hour is its own kind of information, and you don't want to give information to the walls. The man who was supposed to be home by 9 is not home. He is not on the run, not officially, not yet. He was going to a meeting. The meeting was in Red Hook. The meeting was about a payment dispute that needed to be resolved before it became something that payment disputes become when they are not resolved. You know the address where the meeting was supposed to happen. You know the man he was meeting. You know the dispute. You know all of this because you helped arrange it. Because the man who was supposed to arrange it was in MDC and the arrangement needed to happen, and you were the person who knew the phone numbers. What you noticed. At 11:20, a car slows in front of the house and you are on your feet before you are aware of having decided to stand. The car does not stop. It continues down the block. You watch it from the window with your hand on the curtain and you make yourself breathe. The car is not the car. You go back to the table. You look at the phone. The phone is a rotary model, off-white, mounted to the wall next to the refrigerator. And you have been looking at it for 2 hours and 45 minutes, and you know with the specific knowledge that comes from being in this world for 12 years that calling anyone is the wrong move, because calling means questions, and questions mean context, and context means that whatever happened tonight becomes a thing that other people know about. And other people knowing about it before you know the shape of it is a variable you cannot afford. You sit back down. You put your hands flat on the table the way the man at MDC does when a communication is complete. It helps slightly. The television in the other room plays a commercial for a car dealership in Queens. You look at the phone. What got out and what didn't. The man came home at 1:14 in the morning. He was not hurt. The meeting had been delayed and then extended, and he had not called because calling from the location of the meeting was not something you do when the meeting involves the people this meeting involved and a phone that connects to an address that connects to a name. He sat down across from you at the kitchen table and he told you the meeting had been productive and that the dispute was resolved. He did not elaborate. You did not ask him to. What you said was, the next time there is a delay, you find a pay phone 2 blocks away and you call me, and if I don't hear from you by 11, I will not be sitting at this table. I will be doing something and you do not want to find out what I will be doing. He looked at you. He said, fair. That conversation is not in any file. How it was closed. The payment dispute that prompted the meeting in Red Hook was, in subsequent testimony from a cooperating witness, described as one of several financial disagreements that the Colombo War had interrupted and that required resolution as the war wound down. The cooperating witness named 3 people involved in the resolution of the dispute. The 3 people named were all male. The cooperating witness was not asked about the arrangements that preceded the meeting, who arranged the time, who confirmed the location, who ensured that both parties would show up. The cooperating witness did not volunteer this information. The resolution of the dispute was characterized as a positive development in the normalization of relations between factions following the active period of the conflict. The thing that doesn't close. But someone arranged that meeting. Someone knew both phone numbers. Someone had the trust of both sides, enough trust that both parties showed up at an address in Red Hook on a Saturday night in September 1992 and sat in a room together and talked about money instead of about what they had been doing to each other for the previous 18 months. That someone is not named in any document. That someone sat at a kitchen table for 2 hours and 45 minutes and looked at a phone and did not call anyone and did not move and did not crack, because cracking would have been the wrong move and there were no wrong moves available. Not then, not in that kitchen, not with 12 years in this world and a meeting in Red Hook and a man who was late coming home. The trust that made that meeting possible was built over a period of years. It was built in kitchens. It was built in diner booths. It was built on Sundays in visiting rooms at MDC, in conversations that ended with both hands flat on the table. The official record names the men at that meeting. It does not name what made the meeting possible. There is a version of this story where you walk away from number 2 and you are still the person you were at number 10. There isn't a version where you walk away from number 1. 2. The deposition. The room you just walked into. It is a Wednesday morning in March 1994, and you are in a conference room on the 14th floor of a building on Cadman Plaza, and the room has a window that looks out at the East River, and the river is gray today, and the 2 men across from you are federal prosecutors, and the man next to you is your attorney, and your attorney has spent 40 minutes this morning telling you things you already know about how to answer questions, and you have nodded at the appropriate intervals. And now the deposition is beginning. The prosecutor on the left, the younger one, dark suit, the specific energy of someone who believes he is building towards something, opens a folder. He takes a pen from his breast pocket. He places the pen on the table parallel to the folder's edge. He looks up at you. He says, "We appreciate your cooperation." You say, "Of course." The word "of course" is doing considerable work. What you noticed. The questions begin at the edges and move inward, which is the structure you expected. They ask about residence, about employment, about the nature of your relationship with the listed defendants, about visits to MDC, about the social club on Avenue U, about the diner on Flatbush Avenue. And here you keep your face in the arrangement you have been wearing for 2 years in courtrooms, about the contents of the notebook recovered in 1994, about the notebook. You had been told the notebook would come up. Your attorney had prepared you. The preparation involved 3 words. You kept records. That is all you say about the notebook, regardless of how the question is asked. You kept records. The prosecutor asks about the notebook for 22 minutes. He approaches it from 7 different directions. Each time you keep records. Each time you say it with the same tone, the same pace. The same flat factual register that sounds like a woman who is being cooperative and complete and giving him nothing. What got out and what didn't. The deposition was sealed as part of the grand jury proceeding and has not been made public in full. Portions of it were referenced in subsequent motions filed by defense attorneys seeking to establish the government's investigative methods. The references characterize your testimony as extensive and cooperative. The defense motion sought to use this characterization to argue that the government had benefited from your knowledge, while simultaneously declining to name you as a witness in the proceedings, which they argued created a Brady issue around material the government was in possession of. The Brady motion was denied. The sealed deposition remains sealed. Your attorney's billing records for the weeks surrounding the deposition, which surfaced years later in an unrelated civil matter, indicate approximately 40 hours of preparation across a 2-week period. 40 hours of preparation is not what you do for a cooperative witness who has nothing material to offer. How it was closed. You were not indicted. You were not called as a trial witness. The grand jury proceeding that your deposition was part of returned indictments against 8 individuals, all male, all connected to the Colombo family's operations during the war period. None of the 8 indictments referenced your testimony. The case agent's summary of the grand jury's work, filed as part of the prosecutorial record, describes the investigation as having benefited from multiple sources and significant documentary evidence. The documentary evidence includes the notebook. The notebook is described as a recovered administrative record of uncertain authorship. Your name does not appear in the case agent's summary in connection with the notebook. The thing that doesn't close. But you spent 40 hours in preparation, and 2 hours in that room, and 22 minutes answering questions about the notebook. And when you left the building on Cadman Plaza and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the gray river and breathed the March air, what you felt was not relief, and not triumph, and not guilt. What you felt was a specific tiredness that comes from 2 years of being very careful in a situation that punishes imprecision. The prosecutor on the left had been building towards something. He did not get there. Whether he did not get there because you were careful, or because the law has defined the boundaries of culpability in a way that leaves a space between knowing and doing that a careful woman can occupy for 14 months without technically crossing, that is a question the deposition did not resolve. It is a question the official record cannot resolve. It is a question that lives in the 14 months and the 47 visits to MDC and the Buick LeSabre on the BQE and the hallway in Diker Heights and the diner booth on Flatbush and the kitchen on East 13th Street, where a notebook with a floral cover recorded 62 pages of operational memory in handwriting that was never formally attributed. 1. Who you were when it was over. The room you just walked into. It is a Sunday afternoon in late 1995, and the shooting has stopped and the trials are finished, and most of the men have been sentenced, and some of the men have cooperated, and some of those men have said your name in rooms you were not in, and none of what they said has resulted in an indictment, and the organization you spent 14 months holding together is not what it was, and you are sitting at the kitchen table on East 13th Street, and the notebook is gone, taken in the search. Cataloged, filed, attributed to no one, and the table is the same table and the coffee is from this morning and it is getting cold and you are looking at the phone, which is not ringing, which is no longer a problem. The war is over. The official record says the war is over. The official record says the Colombo family was disrupted, prosecuted, diminished, its leadership incarcerated, its finances traced and seized, its operations curtailed. All of this is accurate. You are sitting at the kitchen table and all of this is accurate and you are still here and the table is still here and the coffee is getting cold. What you noticed. What you notice on this Sunday afternoon is the specific quality of the quiet. You have been in this kitchen during many different kinds of quiet. The quiet before a phone call, the quiet after a phone call, the quiet of a Thursday morning in February when you are about to pick up a bag and get into a Buick, the quiet of a visiting room at MDC when both hands go flat on the table. This quiet is different. This quiet has no next thing. The next thing was always, for 14 months, the organizing principle, the call you needed to make, the meeting you needed to arrange, the question you needed to answer without answering it. Now the next thing is coffee. Now the next thing is Sunday. The phone will ring eventually and it will be someone ordinary calling for an ordinary reason, and you will answer it in a normal voice and say normal things and nothing will depend on it. You are not sure you know how to do this. You are not sure you haven't forgotten how to do this. You pick up the cold coffee and you take a sip and you look out the window at the street. What got out and what didn't. The official account of the Colombo War, as it was consolidated in subsequent prosecutorial documents, academic studies, and journalistic retrospectives, attributes the family's operational continuity during the 1991–1993 period to a combination of factors: the resilience of the organizational structure, the loyalty of mid-level members who maintained operations during the leadership disruption, and the difficulty of prosecuting RICO cases quickly enough to prevent ongoing criminal activity during the period between indictment and conviction. This account is accurate. It is accurate in the way that a photograph of a room is accurate. It shows you what was there, but it doesn't tell you what held the furniture in place. The women who held the furniture in place do not appear in the photograph. They were not in front of the camera. They were behind it, or outside the frame, or in the kitchen, or in a diner booth, or in the visiting room at MDC with both hands on the table, waiting for the communication to be complete. How it was closed. The Colombo family's post-war period was characterized, in law enforcement assessments conducted through the mid-1990s, as a period of reduced capacity and organizational instability. Subsequent leadership attempts were prosecuted. Several cooperating witnesses who debriefed with the government during this period provided information about the war's conduct and the family's structure. The cooperating witnesses were, without exception, male. Their debriefings provided the government with a detailed map of the male organizational structure, the female organizational structure, the informal network that moved information, money, and decisions through the family during the period when the male structure was incapacitated, was not comprehensively mapped. It was noted in several places, in language that was careful and nonspecific. It was never the subject of a dedicated investigative effort. This is documented not by the existence of such an effort, but by the absence of one. The thing that doesn't close. But you ran something. This is the sentence that the official record cannot locate a place for. You did not hold a title. You were not named in an organizational chart. You were not indicted, not charged, not tried, not convicted. You kept a notebook, and you answered phones, and you made drives, and you sat in diner booths, and you gave answers to questions in hallways, and you arranged meetings, and you carried words between men who could not speak to each other. And the organization did not collapse during the 14 months when all the institutional logic said it should have collapsed. And the official record's explanation for why it did not collapse does not include your name. The span of years across which women have performed this function within American organized crime families, not just in the Colombo family, not just in New York, not just during the war period of 1991–1993, is approximately as long as organized crime has existed in this country, which is to say approximately a century. The official record of that century contains thousands of male names. It is much quieter about the women who kept the structure functional while the men were being arrested, tried, convicted, killed, or otherwise unavailable. You are one of those women. You are sitting at the kitchen table on East 13th Street on a Sunday afternoon in 1995, and the coffee is cold, and the phone is not ringing, and the official record says you weren't there. You were there the whole time. That's 10 entries. One family, one war, 14 months, and the thing that the official record cannot seem to find a place for, the women who were not supposed to be running anything, who were running everything that was worth running. The notebook with the floral cover is somewhere in a federal archive in the Eastern District of New York. The handwriting has never been formally attributed. The entries in it cover 62 pages of operational memory for an organization that the FBI spent years trying to map. The map they built does not include the person who kept the notebook. Her name is not in this script. It is not in the official record. The people who know it are not talking, and the people who are not talking have been not talking for 30 years, which is a form of professional competence that the official record also fails to adequately document.